The blood-soaked sunset painted the Arizona territory in violent crimson as Hazel Jenkins clutched her worn leather satchel, her knuckles white with fear, as the stagecoach rattled toward Whispering Creek. At 22, she'd never imagined she'd be fleeing for her life, especially not from her own uncle. The year was 1883, and the promise of a new life had turned into a nightmare the moment Uncle Frank had discovered her inheritance. $5,000 a fortune her father had secretly left her before his untimely death in the silver mines. It wasn't the money that had her uncle's eyes gleaming with greed, though. It was what he believed she was worth to others. "Pretty thing like you could fetch double that from the right buyer," he'd whispered that night, his breath reeking of whiskey as she'd backed against the wall of their small cabin. "Might be a wealthy rancher or businessman needs a decorative wife. Ain't like you got other prospects." Hazel had fled that very night, taking nothing but her father's pocket watch, the banknote, and a change of clothes. 3 days on the run, and her fear hadn't subsided. She knew Uncle Frank would come after what he considered his property. The stagecoach lurched to a halt, throwing Hazel forward slightly. She steadied herself against the seat in front and peered out the dusty window. Whispering Creek loomed ahead, a cluster of wooden buildings set against the backdrop of towering mesas and endless sky. It wasn't much, but it was far from Uncle Frank, and that was all that mattered. "End of the line, folks," the driver called, his voice gruff from years of desert dust. Hazel stepped down from the coach, her worn boots hitting the hard-packed dirt. The small frontier town bustled with late-afternoon activity miners heading to the saloon after a long day, shopkeepers closing up for the evening, a pair of cowboys leading their horses toward the livery. One of those cowboys glanced her way, and for a moment their eyes met. He tipped his hat slightly before returning to his conversation. Hazel quickly looked away. The last thing she needed was attention, especially from a man. The Silver Dollar Hotel stood at the end of the main street, its weathered sign promising clean rooms, fair prices. It would have to do until she figured out her next move. With the banknote safely tucked in her boot, Hazel could afford to lie low for a while. The hotel clerk barely looked up as she approached the counter, which suited her just fine. "Need a room?" she said softly. "That'll be 50 cents a night," the clerk replied, still not meeting her eyes. "Name?" Hazel hesitated. "Smith. Hannah Smith." The lie felt clumsy on her tongue, but the clerk didn't seem to notice or care. He slid a key across the counter and pointed toward the stairs. "Second floor, third door on the right." The room was sparse but clean, a narrow bed with a quilt that had seen better days, a washstand with a cracked mirror, and a small window overlooking the main street. Hazel set her satchel on the bed and peered out the window, watching the last of the day's light fade into darkness. Tomorrow, she would need to find work, something respectable that would allow her to blend in. She sat on the edge of the bed and pulled out her father's pocket watch. The gold had long since tarnished, but it still kept perfect time. Her father's voice seemed to echo from it. "Remember, Hazelnut, it ain't beauty that gets you through this world. It's what's inside strength, smarts, and a heart that don't quit." A knock at her door jolted her from her thoughts. Hazel froze, fear clawing at her throat. Had Uncle Frank found her already? She moved silently to the door, pressing her ear against the wood. "Miss Smith?" came a woman's voice. "I've brought some fresh towels." Hazel exhaled slowly, then opened the door a crack. A middle-aged woman with kind eyes held a stack of neatly folded towels. "Thank you," Hazel said, reaching for them. The woman studied her face a moment longer than was comfortable. "New in town, are you?" Hazel nodded stiffly. "Just arrived. Looking for work, I imagine." Another nod. The woman smiled. "Well, Mrs. Patterson at the dress shop is looking for help. Might be worth asking come morning." She paused. "I'm Martha, by the way. I run this place with my husband." "Thank you, Martha," Hazel said, meaning it. "I'll do that." After Martha left, Hazel bolted the door and returned to the window. The main street was quieter now, most of the activity having moved to the saloon, judging by the piano music and laughter drifting up from further down the street. That's when she saw him again, the cowboy from earlier. He was leading his horse toward the livery stable across from the hotel, his movements unhurried but purposeful. Even in the dim light of the street lamps, she could make out his strong profile beneath his hat. There was something steady about him, something that made her watch him longer than she meant to. When he suddenly looked up toward her window, Hazel stepped back quickly, her heart racing. She chided herself for the reaction. She couldn't afford distractions or attachments. Not now, not when she was still running. Sleep came fitfully that night, filled with dreams of being pursued through endless canyons. When dawn finally broke, Hazel was already awake, washing her face in the basin and preparing for the day ahead. She pinned her dark blonde hair in a simple style and put on her cleanest dress, a faded blue calico that had once been her mother's. Patterson's dress shop was easy enough to find, a neat establishment with mannequins in the window displaying the latest frontier fashions. A bell tinkled as Hazel entered, and a plump woman with silver-streaked hair looked up from her sewing. "Good morning," the woman said pleasantly. "How can I help you?" "I heard you might be looking for help, madam," Hazel said, standing straighter. "I'm skilled with a needle and quick to learn." Mrs. Patterson set aside her work and looked Hazel up and down. "You're new here." "Yes, madam. Arrived yesterday." "Family?" Hazel swallowed. "None living, madam." Something softened in the woman's eyes. "Can you do buttonholes? Proper ones, mind? Not those sloppy things most girls call buttonholes these days." "My mother taught me," Hazel said, relaxing slightly. "I can show you." 20 minutes later, Hazel had a job, and her first task helping to finish a wedding dress for the banker's daughter. The pay wasn't much, but it was honest work, and Mrs. Patterson seemed kind if a bit particular about her standards. "You can start tomorrow, 7 sharp," Mrs. Patterson said, as Hazel prepared to leave. "And Hazel, this is a respectable establishment. I expect my girls to maintain a respectable reputation in town." "Yes, madam, you won't have any trouble from me." As Hazel stepped back onto the boardwalk, a sense of accomplishment warmed her chest. A job, a room, the beginnings of a new life. She decided to treat herself to a proper meal at the town's cafe to celebrate. The Bluebird Cafe was busy with the breakfast crowd, but Hazel found a small table near the back. She ordered coffee and a plate of eggs, savoring the normalcy of the moment. The cafe buzzed with conversation, mostly talk of cattle prices, mining prospects, and local gossip. "Hear about the new saloon girl over at the Painted Lady?" a grizzled miner was saying to his companion. "They say Jenkins brought her all the way from Phoenix, paid a pretty penny, too." Hazel stiffened at the name Jenkins, then forced herself to relax. It was a common enough name. "Jenkins got an eye for the marketable ones," the other man replied with a chuckle. "Heard he's looking for more, too. His brother's got a beauty he's bringing up from Tucson, supposed to be worth her weight in silver." The coffee turned bitter in Hazel's mouth. They couldn't be talking about her uncle, could they? The territory was vast, but coincidences like this made her uneasy. She needed to be more careful. The bell over the cafe door jingled, and several heads turned as the cowboy she'd noticed yesterday entered. In the daylight, she could see him clearly tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer storm. He wore simple clothes, functional rather than flashy, with a Colt revolver strapped to his hip. The cafe owner greeted him warmly. "Morning, Yates. The usual?" "Morning, Joe. Yes, please," he replied, his voice deep but soft-spoken. He took a seat at the counter, nodding politely to those around him. So, his name was Yates. Hazel tried not to stare, focusing instead on her breakfast. When she glanced up again, she found him looking directly at her. He nodded once in greeting, the same as he'd done to others, but something in his gaze lingered. Hazel quickly dropped her eyes, feeling heat rise in her cheeks. She finished her meal hurriedly, paid, and left the cafe, feeling strangely off balance. The next few days fell into a pattern. Hazel worked at the dress shop from dawn until late afternoon, took her meals at the cafe, and spent her evenings in her room at the hotel, planning for the future. She opened an account at the Whispering Creek Bank, depositing most of her inheritance, but keeping enough cash hidden in her room for emergencies. She saw the Cowboy Yates around town occasionally, sometimes at the general store, once at the blacksmith's, and every morning at the cafe. He never approached her, but she often felt his eyes on her, watching in a way that wasn't threatening, but was somehow aware. Martha at the hotel had informed her that his full name was Yates Anderson, and he owned a small ranch about 5 miles out of town. "Good man," she'd said. "Quiet type, but fair in his dealings. Took over the ranch when his pa died 2 years back. Runs it with just a couple of hands, doesn't have the spread some of the bigger outfits do, but his horses are the finest in the territory. On Friday afternoon, as Hazel was arranging a display of ribbons in the shop window, a commotion outside drew her attention. 3 riders were making their way down the main street, dust billowing behind them. Something about the lead rider's posture made her blood run cold. Uncle Frank. He looked exactly as she remembered barrel-chested, with a bushy beard and small, calculating eyes. He was dressed better than usual, clearly trying to make an impression. Hazel ducked back from the window, her heart hammering. How had he found her? She peered cautiously around the edge of the display. The 3 men were dismounting in front of the saloon. She needed to get back to the hotel, gather her things, and flee before he spotted her. "Hazel," Mrs. Patterson called from the back. "Are you nearly done with those ribbons? Mrs. Cooper will be in shortly for her fitting." "Yes, madam, just finishing up," she called back, her voice remarkably steady despite her panic. She worked mechanically through Mrs. Cooper's fitting, her mind racing with escape plans. When the customer finally left, Hazel approached Mrs. Patterson. "Madam, I'm feeling rather unwell. Would it be possible for me to leave early today?" Mrs. Patterson frowned. "You do look pale, dear." "Yes, go on. I can manage the rest of the day. Feel better for tomorrow, though it's sure to be busy with the Founders' Day dance coming up." "Thank you, madam." Hazel slipped out the back door of the shop, taking the alley rather than the main street. She needed to reach the hotel without being seen, pack her things, and find a way out of town, perhaps the evening stage heading west. She was halfway to the hotel when a rough hand grabbed her arm, yanking her into the gap between buildings. "Thought you could run, did you?" Uncle Frank hissed, his face inches from hers. "Thought you could take what's mine and disappear?" "Let go of me," Hazel said, struggling against his grip. "I don't have your money. The inheritance was mine, left to me by my father." Frank's fingers dug deeper into her arm. "Your father owed me, girl? For taking you in after he died, for feeding you, clothing you. And that inheritance is just the start. I've got a gentleman in Prescott who's willing to pay handsomely for a pretty young wife. Doesn't even care if she's willing, long as she looks good on his arm." Hazel's blood ran cold. "You can't sell a person. I'm not property." Frank laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the narrow space. "Course I can. Who's gonna stop me? You think anyone in this town cares about some no-name girl with no family? You're coming with me, and you're going to smile and behave until I get my money." "No!" Hazel wrenched herself free, stumbling backward. "I won't go with you. I'll scream. I'll tell the sheriff." "Sheriff's an old friend," Frank sneered, advancing on her. "Had a drink with him not an hour ago. Told him all about my runaway niece who stole from her poor uncle. He's real sympathetic." Hazel backed away, her mind racing. If the sheriff wouldn't help, who would? She opened her mouth to scream anyway, determined to draw attention, when a shadow fell across the alley entrance. "Everything all right here?" The voice was calm, measured, but carried an unmistakable note of authority. Yates Anderson stood at the entrance to the alley, his stance relaxed but his hand resting near his holstered gun. Frank turned, irritation flashing across his face. "Just a family matter, friend. Nothing to concern yourself with." "Seems the lady might disagree," Yates said, his eyes moving to Hazel. "You all right, Miss Jenkins?" She felt a flicker of surprise that he knew her name, but it was overshadowed by relief at his presence. "This man is trying to force me to go with him," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "He claims he owns me." Frank's face darkened. "She's my niece, and she's addled in the head, prone to making up stories. The doc in Tucson said she needs special care." Yates's expression didn't change, but something hardened in his eyes. "Strange. Mrs. Patterson says she's the finest seamstress she's had in years. Mine doesn't seem addled to me." He took a step forward. "Why don't we all walk over to the sheriff's office, sort this out proper?" "Told you, this is family business," Frank growled, his hand moving toward the knife at his belt. Quicker than Hazel could follow, Yates had drawn his revolver and had it pointed steadily at Frank's chest. "Touch that knife, and it'll be the last mistake you make," he said quietly. "Now, your hand's going to move away nice and slow, and then you're going to back up and let the lady pass." For a tense moment, Hazel thought her uncle might defy him. Then Frank's hand moved away from the knife, and he took a grudging step back. "This ain't over," he spat. "She's still my kin, and I've got rights." "Not in my town, you don't," Yates replied. "Miss Jenkins, would you kindly step behind me?" Hazel moved quickly, positioning herself behind Yates's broad shoulders. Even in her fear, she couldn't help noticing the clean scent of him, leather and sage, and something uniquely male. "You've got 1 hour to collect your friends and ride out of Whispering Creek," Yates told Frank, his voice still conversational, but with an edge of steel beneath it. "If I see you after that, I'll assume you're here to make trouble, and I'll handle it accordingly." Frank's eyes darted between Yates and Hazel. "You've no right—" "I've every right to protect the citizens of this town from men who think they can sell women." Yates cut him off. 1 hour. Jenkins, clock's ticking. After a final venomous glare, Frank backed away and stalked off toward the saloon. Yates holstered his weapon and turned to Hazel, his expression softening. "Are you hurt, Miss Jenkins?" "No," she said, though she could feel bruises forming where Frank had gripped her arm. "Thank you, Mr. Anderson." "Yates," he corrected gently. "And you're welcome, though I reckon this isn't over. Men like that don't give up easily." "No," Hazel agreed, wrapping her arms around herself. "They don't." He studied her face. "You need a safe place to stay until we can be sure he's gone for good. The hotel's too public, too easy for him to get to you." "We?" The word slipped out before she could stop it. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I've appointed myself your protector, Miss Jenkins, at least temporarily." "Unless you object?" She should object. She'd been taking care of herself for years, and trusting a man she barely knew went against every instinct for self-preservation she'd developed. And yet, there was something about Yates Anderson that made her want to trust him. "I don't object," she said finally, "but I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," he said simply. "Now, I think we should get your things from the hotel. My ranch isn't fancy, but it's secure, and my housekeeper, Mrs. Finch, is always complaining about how empty the place is." An hour later, Hazel was seated beside Yates in his wagon, her small collection of belongings stowed in the back. They'd informed both Mrs. Patterson and Martha at the hotel of the situation. Martha had been particularly supportive. "That man came asking about you," she'd confided as Hazel packed. "Said he was your uncle looking to surprise you. Something in his manner didn't sit right with me, so I told him I didn't know any Hazel Jenkins." "Thank you," Hazel had said, touched by the woman's protective instinct. Now, as the wagon rattled along the dusty road leading out of town, Hazel stole glances at the man beside her. In profile, his features were strong, a straight nose, firm jaw shadowed with stubble, and those remarkable eyes focused on the road ahead. His hands, holding the reins, were calloused from work, but handled the leather with unexpected gentleness. "You can ask, you know," he said suddenly, not looking at her. "Ask what?" "Whatever questions are bouncing around in that head of yours," he replied, and now she could hear a smile in his voice. "I can practically hear you thinking." Hazel flushed. "I was wondering how you knew my name, my real name. I've been using Smith since I arrived." Yates nodded, as if he'd expected this question. "Small towns have big ears, Miss Jenkins. The stagecoach driver mentioned a young lady traveling alone who seemed nervous. Then when Frank Jenkins rode into town, asking about his niece Hazel, it wasn't hard to put the pieces together." "And yet, you didn't tell him where to find me," she observed. "Something about a man hunting a woman never sits right with me," he said simply, "especially when he's talking about her like she's property to be traded." They fell silent for a while, the only sounds the creak of the wagon wheels and the steady clop of the horses' hooves. The landscape opened up around them, vast stretches of sage-dotted plains backed by distant mesas, all painted in the warm hues of late afternoon sun. "It's beautiful," Hazel murmured, almost to herself. "It is," Yates agreed, his voice softening. "First time I saw this land as a boy, I knew I'd never want to leave it." "You grew up here?" He nodded. "My father came west after the war, started the ranch with nothing but determination and a few good horses, built it up bit by bit. It's not the biggest spread in the territory, but it's good land." As they crested a small rise, Yates's ranch came into view, a neat collection of buildings nestled in a shallow valley, with corrals holding several magnificent horses. The main house was modest but well built, with a wide porch and windows that caught the setting sun. "Welcome to the Rocking A," Yates said, a note of pride in his voice. "It's lovely," Hazel said honestly. It looked like what a home should be welcoming, solid, a place of safety. As they approached, a woman emerged from the house, wiping her hands on her apron. Short and stout, with gray hair pulled back in a severe bun, she watched their approach with curious eyes. "Mrs. Finch," Yates called as he pulled the wagon to a stop. "We've got a guest who'll be staying with us for a while." The housekeeper's eyebrows rose, but she nodded. "I'll make up the spare room then." "This is Miss Hazel Jenkins," Yates continued, helping Hazel down from the wagon. "She's had some trouble in town and needs a safe place to stay." Mrs. Finch's expression softened as she took in Hazel's appearance. "Well, you're welcome here, Miss Jenkins. Dinner's almost ready. Hope you like beef stew." "Thank you, Mrs. Finch. I don't want to be any trouble." "No trouble," the woman said firmly. "Been telling Mr. Anderson this place needs a woman's touch for ages. Too much emptiness isn't good for a home." Yates cleared his throat. "I'll get your things, Miss Jenkins, and show you to your room." The inside of the ranch house was simply but comfortably furnished, with a large stone fireplace dominating the main room. Photographs adorned the mantel. An older couple Hazel assumed were Yates's parents, a younger Yates in military uniform, and several of horses that must have been special to the family. The spare room was small but pleasant, with a narrow bed covered in a colorful quilt, a chest of drawers, and a window overlooking the eastern pasture. "It's not much," Yates said, setting her satchel on the bed, "but you'll be safe here." "It's perfect," Hazel assured him. "I can't thank you enough for your kindness, Mr. Anderson." "Yates," he corrected again, a slight smile playing at his lips. "And there's no need for thanks. I'd do the same for anyone in your situation." Somehow Hazel doubted that was entirely true, but she appreciated the sentiment. Dinner was a simple but delicious affair, the stew rich and flavorful. Mrs. Finch kept the conversation flowing, asking Hazel about her work at the dress shop and sharing gossip about town. It felt strangely normal, sitting at this table with people who were essentially strangers, but who had opened their home to her without hesitation. After dinner, Yates excused himself to check on the horses, and Mrs. Finch insisted Hazel relax while she cleared the table. "He's a good man," the housekeeper said suddenly as she stacked plates. "Best I've known, truth be told. Works harder than 3 men and never complains. Been alone too long, though." Hazel wasn't sure how to respond to this apparent confidence. "He seems very kind," she offered. Mrs. Finch nodded. "Kind, yes, but there's steel in him, too. Fought in the Apache campaigns before his father died. Came back different, quieter, more watchful. The war changed him, like it does most men." Later, unable to sleep despite the comfortable bed, Hazel stepped onto the porch. The night was clear, stars scattered across the vast dome of sky like diamond dust. She breathed deeply, savoring the clean scent of sage and open spaces. "Can't sleep?" She startled at Yates's voice, turning to find him seated in a chair at the far end of the porch, almost invisible in the shadows. "I didn't see you there," she said, one hand pressed to her racing heart. "Sorry," he said, rising. "Didn't mean to frighten you." "It's all right. And no, I couldn't sleep. Too many thoughts." He nodded as if he understood perfectly. "Night air helps sometimes, clears the head." Hazel moved to the porch railing, looking out at the silver-washed landscape. "What will happen if Uncle Frank doesn't leave town?" "Then we'll deal with it," Yates said simply, coming to stand beside her, though he maintained a respectful distance. "But my guess is he'll move on, at least for now. Men like him are cowards at heart. They prey on those they think can't fight back. And if he comes back with more men, or goes to the sheriff with his lies..." Yates turned to face her, his expression solemn in the moonlight. "Miss Jenkins, Hazel, I promise you this. As long as you're under my protection, no harm will come to you. Not from Frank Jenkins, not from anyone." The quiet conviction in his voice stirred something in her chest. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why would you do this for someone you barely know?" He was silent for a long moment, his gaze moving back to the distant horizon. "Because I've seen what happens when good people stand by and do nothing in the face of injustice," he finally said, "and I swore I'd never be that person." There was a story there, Hazel sensed, something painful and personal, but she didn't press. Everyone had their ghosts, their private sorrows. "Thank you," she said instead, "not just for the protection, but for believing me, for seeing me as a person worth helping." Yates looked at her then, really looked at her, and something in his gaze made her breath catch. "What I see," he said slowly, "is a woman of remarkable courage. Most people would have broken under what you've endured." Hazel shook her head. "I'm not brave, just stubborn," my father used to say. A smile touched his lips. Stubbornness and courage often look the same from the outside. He straightened and took a step back. "You should try to get some sleep. Tomorrow will be here soon enough." "Good night, Yates," she said, testing the familiarity of his name. "Good night, Hazel," he replied, and the way he said her name like something precious, something to be savored, followed her into her dreams. The next day brought a new routine. Finch put Hazel to work, helping with household chores, seeming to understand her need to be useful rather than merely a guest. By mid-morning, they'd baked bread, churned butter, and were hanging laundry on the line behind the house when a rider approached from the direction of town. "That's Miguel," Mrs. Finch said, shading her eyes. "One of the hands. Wonder what brings him back so early. He was supposed to be picking up supplies." Miguel, a young Mexican man with a quick smile and watchful eyes, dismounted and hurried toward them, his expression troubled. "Mrs. Finch, Miss Jenkins," he greeted them. "Is Mr. Anderson around? I have news from town." "He's out checking the north pasture fence," Mrs. Finch replied. "What kind of news?" Miguel glanced at Hazel, hesitating. "It's about Miss Jenkins' uncle. He didn't leave town yesterday like Mr. Anderson told him to. Instead, he went to the sheriff with some story about his niece stealing from him." Hazel's stomach dropped. "What did the sheriff say?" "Sheriff didn't believe him entirely, but he says he needs to at least talk to you, Miss Jenkins, to hear your side." Miguel shifted uncomfortably. "There's more. Jenkins has been talking all over town, telling people his niece is not right in the head, that she needs special care, which is why he's come to take her home." "That's ridiculous," Mrs. Finch exclaimed. "Anyone who spoke 2 words to Miss Jenkins would know she's as sound-minded as anyone." "Yes, madam, but people talk, and Jenkins has been spending money freely at the saloon, making friends." Miguel looked directly at Hazel. "Mr. Anderson asked me to watch him, and I heard him talking with a man named Prescott. They were discussing a price for you, Miss Jenkins." Hazel felt cold despite the warm morning sun. "He really means to sell me then?" Miguel nodded grimly. "Seems so. This Prescott fellow owns mines near Tombstone, widower, looking for a wife. Jenkins told him you were beautiful but spirited, needed a firm hand." Mrs. Finch put a protective arm around Hazel's shoulders. "Over my dead body," she declared fiercely. "Miguel, ride out and find Mr. Anderson. Tell him what's happening." "Yes, madam." Miguel tipped his hat and mounted his horse. As he rode off, Hazel turned to Mrs. Finch, fear and determination warring within her. "I should leave. I'm bringing trouble to Yates's door." The older woman's grip on her tightened. "Nonsense. Yates Anderson is more than capable of handling the likes of Frank Jenkins, and he wouldn't want you facing this alone. But why should he risk himself for me? It makes no sense." Mrs. Finch's expression softened. "Doesn't it? I've watched him these past few days, how he looks at you when he thinks no one's noticing. And I've seen how you look at him too." Hazel felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I don't. We barely know each other." "Some souls recognize each other right away," Mrs. Finch said simply. "Like they've been waiting to find each other all along. My Henry and I were like that knew the first day we met, that we'd be together until death parted us." Before Hazel could respond, the sound of approaching horses drew their attention. Yates and Miguel were riding hard toward the house, dust billowing behind them. Yates dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, striding toward them with purpose in every line of his body. "Miguel told me," he said without preamble. "Are you all right?" The concern in his eyes touched something deep in Hazel. "Yes, I'm fine. Just worried about what happens next." "What happens next," Yates said firmly, "is we go to town together and set this straight. The sheriff's a reasonable man. Once he hears your side, he'll understand what kind of man Frank Jenkins really is." "And if he doesn't?" Hazel asked, voicing her deepest fear. Yates's jaw tightened. Then we find another way. I won't let him take you, Hazel. I promise you that." The ride to town was tense, the wagon moving at a brisk pace with Miguel riding alongside as additional protection. Yates had insisted Hazel change into her best dress. "We want you looking respectable for the sheriff," and Mrs. Finch had pinned her hair in a neat style that emphasized her natural beauty while appearing modest and proper. "Remember," Yates said as the outskirts of Whispering Creek came into view, "just tell the truth. Your uncle has no legal right to you. You're a grown woman, and he certainly has no right to sell you to anyone, no matter what he might claim." The sheriff's office was a small building next to the town jail. As they approached, Hazel saw her uncle lounging against the hitching post outside, a satisfied smile spreading across his face when he spotted her. "There's my dear niece now," he called, loud enough for passers-by to hear. "Poor, confused girl. Thank you for bringing her in, Anderson." Yates ignored him. Helping Hazel down from the wagon and escorting her past Frank and into the office, his hand a reassuring presence at her back. Sheriff Davis was a lean man with a weathered face and shrewd eyes that missed little. He rose from behind his desk as they entered. "Mr. Anderson, and you must be Miss Jenkins," he said, nodding to Hazel. "Please, have a seat." Frank pushed in behind them, but the sheriff held up a hand. "Wait outside, Jenkins. I'll hear from each of you separately." "But she's my responsibility," Frank began. "Outside," the sheriff repeated, his tone brooking no argument. "Or you can cool your heels in a cell while we talk. Your choice." With a dark look at Hazel, Frank retreated, closing the door behind him with more force than necessary. "Now then," Sheriff Davis said, settling back into his chair. "I've heard quite a tale from your uncle, Miss Jenkins. Claims you stole a considerable sum of money from him and ran away. Says you're not quite right in the head, prone to flights of fancy and the like." "None of that is true, Sheriff," Hazel said, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "The money was my inheritance from my father, left to me in his will. I have the banknote to prove it." She reached into her reticule and produced the document. "As for my mental state, I believe I can demonstrate my soundness of mind in any way you deem appropriate." The sheriff examined the banknote carefully, then looked up at her with new interest. "This appears legitimate, and I must say, you don't strike me as addled in any way." He glanced at Yates. "What's your interest in this matter, Anderson?" "Miss Jenkins came to me for protection after her uncle threatened her," Yates explained. "I overheard him telling her he intended to sell her to a man in Prescott for her beauty, treating her like property rather than a person." Sheriff Davis's eyebrows rose. "Sell her? That's a serious accusation." "One your deputy can verify," Yates continued. "Miguel Ortiz heard Jenkins discussing the price with a man named Prescott just yesterday at the saloon." The sheriff leaned back, considering this information. "Miguel's word carries weight with me. He's got honest eyes." He studied Hazel for a long moment. "Miss Jenkins, are you of age?" "Yes, Sheriff. I'm 22 years old." "And you wish to remain in Whispering Creek, free of your uncle's guardianship?" "I do. I've found honest work at Mrs. Patterson's dress shop. I've harmed no one, and I only wish to live my life in peace." Sheriff Davis nodded slowly. "Well, as far as I can tell, Frank Jenkins has no legal claim on you or your inheritance. You're a grown woman, free to live where you choose and work as you please." He rose from his chair. "I'll inform your uncle of my decision. Mr. Anderson, perhaps you'd care to accompany me? Miss Jenkins can wait here." Hazel caught Yates's hesitation, his reluctance to leave her alone. "I'll be fine," she assured him. "This is the sheriff's office after all." With a nod, Yates followed the sheriff outside. Through the window, Hazel could see them confronting Frank, whose face grew redder by the moment as the sheriff spoke. Frank's voice rose, though she couldn't make out his words, and then Yates stepped forward, saying something that made Frank's expression change from anger to calculation. After what seemed an eternity, the door opened and Yates returned, followed by the sheriff. "Your uncle has agreed to leave town on the afternoon stage," Sheriff Davis informed her. "He won't be troubling you again." Relief flooded through Hazel, but it was tempered with skepticism. "He gave up that easily?" Yates and the sheriff exchanged a glance. "Let's just say," Yates said carefully, "that I made him understand the consequences of persisting in his claims. Sheriff Davis cleared his throat. Miss Jenkins, I owe you an apology for entertaining your uncle's accusations, even briefly. Rest assured, you have the law's protection should he return to Whispering Creek. Thank you, Sheriff, Hazel said, rising from her chair. I appreciate your fairness. Outside, the street was busy with midday traffic. Frank was nowhere to be seen. He went to gather his things from the hotel, Yates explained, helping her into the wagon. The stage leaves at 2 o'clock. I intend to see him on it personally. What did you say to him? Hazel asked as they pulled away from the sheriff's office. To make him give up so easily? A ghost of a smile touched Yates's lips. I simply pointed out that Whispering Creek takes care of its own, and that if he persisted in trying to sell his niece, he might find himself facing more than just the law's disapproval. I may have mentioned that my ranch hands and several of the miners are particularly protective of the town's womenfolk. You threatened him, Hazel said, not sure whether to be appalled or impressed. I made him aware of certain realities, Yates corrected mildly, and I offered a financial incentive for his cooperation. You paid him? Now she was definitely appalled. Think of it as an investment in peace of mind, Yates said, his eyes on the road ahead. A small price to ensure he leaves and doesn't return. Hazel fell silent, conflicted feelings churning within her. Part of her was grateful for Yates's intervention, for his unwavering support. Another part felt ashamed that he'd had to pay off her uncle, as if she were indeed property being transferred from one man to another. As if sensing her thoughts, Yates spoke again, his voice gentle. The money means nothing to me, Hazel. Your safety and freedom are what matter. I'd have given 10 times the amount to insure them. I'll pay you back, she said firmly. Every cent. I won't be beholden. Yates glanced at her, something like admiration in his eyes. I've no doubt you will, if that's what you want. But know this isn't about debt or obligation, not for me. What is it about, then? The question slipped out before she could stop it. He was silent for a long moment, his hands steady on the reins. When I first saw you step off that stagecoach, he finally said, something in me recognized something in you. A kind of kinship, I suppose. You looked like someone who had seen hardship but hadn't let it break you. Someone who carried strength inside, not just beauty on the outside. His words stirred something in Hazel's chest, a warmth that spread outward. No one had ever seen her that way before, seen past her appearance to the person beneath. Thank you, she said softly, for seeing me. Their eyes met briefly, and in that moment, Hazel felt a connection that transcended their short acquaintance, as if they'd known each other in some other life, some other time. They returned to the ranch in companionable silence, and Hazel found herself hoping, for the first time in years, that she might have found a place where she truly belonged. True to his word, Yates ensured that Frank Jenkins boarded the afternoon stage. Miguel reported back that the man had left without further incident, though not without a parting glare that promised this might not be the end of the matter. For the next 2 weeks, Hazel settled into a new routine. She returned to her job at the dress shop during the day, but continued staying at the Rocking A Ranch, with Yates driving her to and from town. Mrs. Finch took an almost maternal interest in her, teaching her the finer points of ranch cooking and regaling her with stories of the early days when the territory was even wilder than it was now. Yates himself was often busy with ranch work, but he made a point of spending time with Hazel each evening, usually on the porch after dinner. Their conversations ranged widely from books they had read to their hopes for the future. Hazel learned that Yates had fought with distinction in the campaigns against the Apache, but had come to respect their culture and their right to their lands. He spoke with admiration of their skill as warriors and their deep connection to the natural world. The worst thing we did, he told her one evening, as they watched the sunset paint the distant mesas in shades of gold and crimson, was try to force them to be like us, to abandon their ways. A people should be free to live according to their own beliefs, their own traditions. Is that why you were so quick to help me? Hazel asked. Because you believe in freedom? Yates considered this, his profile strong against the fading light. Partly, he acknowledged, but it was more than that. It was... He paused, searching for words. When I saw how your uncle looked at you like you were nothing but an asset to be traded, something in me rebelled. You deserve to be seen as you are, Hazel. Not as property, not as merely beautiful, but as a woman of substance and strength. His words warmed her more than she cared to admit. In the short time she'd known him, Yates Anderson had shown her more respect than any man in her life, save her father. As days turned into weeks, Hazel found herself looking forward to those evening conversations more and more. She began to notice small things about Yates, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, how gentle his hands were when he tended an injured horse, the quiet authority with which he led his small crew of ranch hands. And sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, she caught him watching her with an expression that made her heart beat faster. The Founders' Day dance was approaching, a major social event for Whispering Creek and the surrounding ranches. Mrs. Patterson had closed the shop early to allow Hazel time to prepare, insisting she borrow a beautiful blue dress that had been ordered but never claimed. "It would suit you perfectly," Mrs. Patterson had said, holding the dress against Hazel. "With your coloring and figure, you'll be the belle of the dance." Hazel had protested that she wasn't planning to attend, but both Mrs. Patterson and Mrs. Finch had overridden her objections. "Of course you're going," Mrs. Finch declared, when Hazel returned to the ranch with the borrowed dress. "Mr. Anderson already said he'd escort you. It'll do you both good to enjoy yourselves for a change." Hazel felt a flutter of anticipation at the thought of attending the dance with Yates. She hadn't been to a proper social event in years. Uncle Frank had never allowed it, claiming it was a waste of time and money. The night of the dance arrived clear and cool, with a full moon rising over the eastern hills. Hazel took special care with her appearance, arranging her hair in a more sophisticated style than her usual practical arrangement, and adding a touch of rosewater to her wrists and throat. When she emerged from her room, Mrs. Finch gasped in approval. "My dear, you look absolutely lovely. That blue is perfect with your eyes." Before Hazel could respond, a sound from the doorway drew her attention. Yates stood there, dressed in his best clothes, a dark suit that emphasized his broad shoulders, a crisp white shirt, and a string tie. He'd clearly just shaved, and his hair was neatly combed. But it was the expression in his eyes as they fell on Hazel that took her breath away, a mixture of admiration, desire, and something deeper that she dared not name. "You look beautiful," he said simply, but the words held a weight that made her cheeks warm. "Thank you," she replied, smoothing her skirt nervously. "You look very handsome yourself." Mrs. Finch bustled around them, handing Yates his hat, and Hazel a shawl against the evening chill. "Now, don't you two worry about getting back early. Miguel and I can manage things here. You just enjoy yourselves." The town hall had been transformed for the occasion, with lanterns strung from the ceiling and wildflowers adorning every available surface. A small band played in one corner, and couples were already spinning around the dance floor when Yates and Hazel arrived. Hazel felt the curious eyes of the townspeople as they entered, and she heard the whispers that followed them. Her weeks in Whispering Creek had been largely spent at the dress shop or the ranch, and her connection to Yates was the subject of considerable speculation. "Don't mind them," Yates murmured, his hand warm at the small of her back. "Small towns run on gossip. They'll find something new to talk about soon enough." Before she could respond, Mrs. Patterson approached, beaming. "Hazel, my dear, that dress is even more perfect on you than I imagined. And Mr. Anderson, how handsome you look tonight. I declare, you make the finest couple in the room." Hazel felt herself blush at the implication, but Yates merely smiled and thanked Mrs. Patterson for the compliment. The evening passed in a whirl of music and laughter. Yates proved to be an excellent dancer, leading Hazel through waltzes and reels with confident grace. She found herself relaxing in his arms, the rhythm of the music and the warmth of his presence making her forget, for a time, the troubles that had brought her to Whispering Creek. During a pause between dances, Yates brought her a cup of punch and led her to a quiet corner. "Are you enjoying yourself?" he asked, his eyes searching her face. "Very much," she admitted. "I haven't danced in years. I'd almost forgotten how much I love it." "You move beautifully," he said, and there was that look again, the one that made her feel both seen and cherished. "Like you were made for it." Before she could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew their attention. Hazel's blood ran cold as she recognized the figure pushing his way through the crowd. Uncle Frank. He looked disheveled and angry, his eyes scanning the room until they locked on Hazel. At his side was another man, older, expensively dressed, with cold eyes that assessed Hazel like a prize horse at auction. "There she is," Frank bellowed, pointing. "My niece, the one I told you about, Prescott." So, this was the man Frank had promised to sell her to. Hazel felt sick, but she forced herself to stand straight, Yates a solid presence beside her. The music stopped abruptly, and the crowd parted as Frank and his companion approached. "Hazel girl, time to come home," Frank slurred, clearly drunk. "Mr. Prescott here has taken a shine to you, just like I said he would. Offering a good price, too." Whispers erupted around the room. Yates stepped forward, placing himself between Hazel and the two men. "I believe the sheriff made it clear you weren't welcome in Whispering Creek, Jenkins," he said, his voice low, but carrying in the suddenly silent hall. Frank sneered. "Sheriff ain't here tonight, and I got business to conclude." He gestured to his companion. "Mr. Prescott's a very wealthy man, owns half the mines in Cochise County. Been looking for a pretty wife, and I promised him the prettiest." Prescott himself spoke up, his voice cultured but with an underlying coldness that made Hazel's skin crawl. "I can provide for the young lady far better than a small-time rancher, Anderson. She'll want for nothing as my wife." "Except her freedom," Hazel said, finding her voice at last. She stepped up beside Yates, her head high. "I am not for sale, Mr. Prescott. Not to you, not to anyone." Frank's face darkened. "Now, see here, girl." "No, you see here," Yates interrupted, his hand moving to his side, where Hazel knew he wore his revolver, even with his formal attire. "Miss Jenkins is a free woman. Of age and sound mind, she has employment, a place in this community, and my protection. You have no claim on her, legal or otherwise." "Your protection?" Prescott's eyebrows rose. "What exactly is your relationship to my prospective bride, Anderson?" Before Yates could answer, Hazel spoke, her voice clear and steady. "Mr. Anderson has been a true friend when I needed one most. He saw me not for what I could be sold for, but for who I am. He recognized my strength when others only saw my face." She turned to look at Yates as she spoke, and what she saw in his eyes in that moment, pride, admiration, and something that looked remarkably like love, gave her courage to continue. "And I've come to care for him deeply," she added, her voice softer now, but no less certain. "So, you see, Mr. Prescott, even if I were for sale, which I most certainly am not, my heart is already spoken for." A murmur ran through the crowd, and Hazel was dimly aware of Mrs. Patterson nodding in approval, and several of the townswomen dabbing at their eyes. But all that truly mattered was Yates's expression, the wonder and joy that transformed his features as her words registered. Frank, however, was not deterred. "Pretty speech," he sneered, "but blood is blood, and she's my kin. I've got rights." "You've got nothing," came a new voice, and Sheriff Davis pushed through the crowd, his badge gleaming in the lantern light. "Except about 10 seconds to get out of my town before I arrest you for attempted kidnapping." Frank's face paled. "Kidnapping? That's my niece." "A niece you admitted trying to sell," the sheriff countered. "I've got witnesses who heard you at the saloon, discussing her price like she was cattle. That's not how we treat women in this territory, Jenkins. Now get out and take your friend with you." For a tense moment, it seemed Frank might resist. Then Prescott laid a hand on his arm. "Come, Jenkins. It appears we've misjudged the situation. I have no interest in a woman who's unwilling, no matter how beautiful." With a final venomous glare at Hazel and Yates, Frank allowed himself to be led away, the sheriff following to ensure their departure. As the doors closed behind them, the tension in the room broke. The band struck up a lively tune, and conversations resumed, though many curious glances were still directed at Hazel and Yates. "I think," Yates said quietly, taking her hand, "we might step outside for a moment. There's something I need to say to you." Heart pounding, Hazel allowed him to lead her onto the small porch that fronted the town hall. The night was clear and cool, stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet sky. Yates turned to face her, still holding her hand, his expression more open and vulnerable than she'd ever seen it. "Did you mean what you said in there?" he asked. "About caring for me?" Hazel nodded, suddenly shy. "Yes. I know it hasn't been long, but time doesn't matter," he interrupted gently. "Not when two souls recognize each other the way ours did." His words echoed Mrs. Finch's, and Hazel smiled at the coincidence. Mrs. Finch said something similar. Wise woman, Yates murmured, stepping closer. Hazel, from the moment I saw you, something in me knew you were special, not just for your beauty, though you're the loveliest woman I've ever seen, but for that fire in your eyes, that determination not to be broken by life's hardships. He took both her hands in his now, his touch warm and strong. What I said that day in the alley was true. It's your strength I admire most, your courage, your resilience. Those are the qualities that matter, that last when beauty fades. And my heart, Hazel whispered, does that matter too? More than anything, Yates replied, his voice rough with emotion. If I could be worthy of your heart, Hazel Jenkins, I'd consider myself the richest man in the territory. She looked up at him. This man who had protected her without trying to possess her, who had seen her worth beyond her appearance, who had given her space to be strong in her own right. You already are worthy, she said softly. More than worthy. Slowly giving her every chance to pull away, Yates lowered his head and brushed his lips against hers. The kiss was gentle, questioning, and Hazel responded with all the feelings that had been growing in her heart these past weeks. Her hands moved to his shoulders, and his arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer as the kiss deepened. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Yates rested his forehead against hers. I love you, Hazel Jenkins, he said simply. I think I have from the first moment I saw you. Joy bloomed in her chest, bright and warm. And I love you, Yates Anderson, for seeing my strength when others only saw my face. The following spring brought changes to Whispering Creek. The railroad finally reached the town, bringing with it new opportunities and faces. Mrs. Patterson's dress shop expanded, with Hazel now a full partner in the business, specializing in bridal wear that was becoming known throughout the territory for its elegance and craftsmanship. The rocking A Ranch prospered as well. Yates's breeding program, producing horses that commanded top prices from buyers as far away as California and Texas. With the profits, he built a larger home, with wide windows to capture the stunning views of the surrounding landscape. It was in front of those windows, with the sunset painting the mesas in shades of gold and crimson, that Yates and Hazel exchanged their vows, surrounded by friends who had become family: Mrs. Finch, Miguel, and the other ranch hands, Mrs. Patterson, Sheriff Davis, and many of the townsfolk who had come to respect and admire the young woman who had arrived so quietly on the stagecoach less than a year before. I take you, Hazel Jenkins, to be my lawfully wedded wife, Yates said, his voice steady and sure. Not for your beauty, though it takes my breath away, but for your strength, your courage, and your heart, which I will treasure and protect all the days of my life. Tears glimmered in Hazel's eyes as she responded. I take you, Yates Anderson, to be my lawfully wedded husband, for your kindness, your honor, and your ability to see me, truly see me, when others looked but never saw. As they sealed their vows with a kiss, cheers erupted from their assembled friends. Mrs. Finch dabbed at her eyes with her handkerchief, muttering something about "known it from the start" that made Miguel grin and nod in agreement. The celebration continued well into the night, with music and dancing and food prepared by Mrs. Finch and the women of the town. As the hour grew late, Yates led Hazel out onto the porch of their new home, away from the noise and laughter. "Happy, Mrs. Anderson?" he asked, pulling her close. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible," she replied, nestling against his chest. "A year ago, I was running for my life, afraid of my own shadow. Now I have a home, a business, friends, and you." "You had the strength inside you all along," Yates said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "All I did was recognize it." Hazel tilted her head up to meet his gaze. "That's not all you did. You showed me that I was worth fighting for, worth loving. You taught me that my value isn't in my face or what men might pay for it, but in who I am." Yates's arms tightened around her. "And who you are, Hazel Anderson, is the most remarkable woman I've ever known. Strong, brave, and beautiful in ways that have nothing to do with your appearance." As they stood together, watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast desert sky, Hazel knew with absolute certainty that she had found her place in the world not as someone's property or ornament, but as a woman valued for her true self, her strength, and her heart. and when Yates led her inside to their bedroom, closing the door on the celebrating guests, still enjoying the wedding feast, it was with the reverence of a man who knew the true worth of the woman he loved, a worth that could never be measured in dollars or gold, but only in the currency of respect, admiration, and abiding love. 5 years later, the Rocking A Ranch had grown to become one of the most prosperous in the territory. The main house, once modest, now boasted additions to accommodate the growing family, Yates and Hazel's twin daughters, Eleanor and Elizabeth, born 3 years after their wedding, and their son, James, just celebrating his first birthday. Hazel stood on the porch, watching as Yates taught the girls to ride their ponies in the corral near the house. At 4 years old, they were fearless, with their mother's determination and their father's natural affinity for horses. James squirmed in her arms, eager to join his sisters, though he could barely toddle on his own 2 feet. "Patience, little man," Hazel murmured, kissing his dark curls. "Your time will come soon enough." As if sensing her watching, Yates looked up and smiled, that same smile that still made her heart skip after all these years. He said something to the girls, then strode toward the house, his long legs eating up the distance. "The girls want to show you how they can post to the trot now," he said, reaching for James, who went eagerly into his father's arms. "They're naturals, just like their mother." Hazel laughed. "I think you mean like their father. I still remember how long it took me to learn to ride properly." "You mastered it quickly enough," Yates said, pride in his voice, "just like you mastered running the dress shop and helping with the ranch accounts and being the best mother our children could ask for." The mention of the dress shop brought a tinge of sadness. Mrs. Patterson had passed away the previous winter, leaving the business entirely to Hazel. It had been difficult to balance the shop with her growing family, but with the help of 2 young apprentices she'd taken on, the business continued to thrive. "I was thinking," Yates said, following her gaze toward town, "that it might be time to bring someone else into the business, a full partner to help carry the load." Hazel looked at him in surprise. "You've been thinking about the dress shop?" He smiled. "I think about everything that matters to you, and I know how important the shop is, not just for the income, but for the independence it gives you." He shifted James to his other arm. "Miguel's younger sister Maria has a real talent with fabrics. She's been helping out occasionally, hasn't she?" "Yes, and she's remarkable," Hazel admitted. "She has an eye for design that rivals Mrs. Patterson's in her prime." "There you go then," Yates said, as if it were settled. "Offer her a partnership. You can still oversee things, design when you want to, but without having to be there every day." Hazel smiled up at him, love swelling in her chest. This was so typical of Yates, always thinking of ways to make her life fuller, to support her in balancing all the aspects of herself. "What did I do to deserve you?" she asked softly. "I ask myself the same question every day," he replied, leaning down to kiss her gently. "How did a rough cowboy like me win the heart of the strongest, most beautiful woman in the territory?" "You saw me," she said simply, "when others only looked." A shout from the corral interrupted them. The twins, impatient for their mother to witness their new riding skills. Laughing, Hazel and Yates walked toward them, James babbling happily in his father's arms. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the land in those same gold and crimson hues that had backdropped their wedding, Hazel felt a contentment so deep it seemed to reach into her very bones. From frightened fugitive to respected businesswoman, beloved wife, and cherished mother. The journey had not always been easy, but it had led her exactly where she was meant to be. Later that night, with the children asleep and the house quiet, Hazel and Yates sat on the porch swing, a blanket draped over their laps against the cooling air. His arm was around her shoulders, and her head rested comfortably against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Do you ever think about how different things might have been?" she asked. "If Uncle Frank had never found me, or if you hadn't been in that alley that day?" Yates was silent for a moment, his fingers tracing patterns on her shoulder. "I believe we would have found each other anyway," he finally said. "Some things are meant to be, Hazel. Some souls are destined to come together, no matter what paths they take." She smiled in the darkness. "Mrs. Finch would agree with you. She always said we recognized each other's souls from the first." "Smart woman, Mrs. Finch," Yates murmured, pressing a kiss to her hair. I'm just grateful I was in the right place at the right time to stop your uncle. The thought of you being sold to Prescott, or anyone else." Hazel felt his arms tighten around her at the memory. "It wasn't just that you stopped him," she said softly. "It was what you said, that it was my strength you wanted, not just my beauty. No one had ever valued that part of me before." "It's the most valuable part," Yates said simply. "Beauty fades, but strength of character, strength of heart that lasts a lifetime." As if to emphasize his point, he turned her face up to his and kissed her, a kiss that still held all the passion of their early days together, but was now deepened by years of shared experiences, shared struggles, shared joys. "I love you, Hazel Anderson," he whispered against her lips. "Every part of you, the beautiful parts, the strong parts, the stubborn parts, all of you." "And I love you, Yates Anderson," she replied, her heart full to bursting. "For seeing all those parts, for valuing them, for helping me become the woman I was meant to be." As they sat together in the quiet of the desert night, the stars a brilliant canopy above them and their children sleeping peacefully within, Hazel knew that this love, this family, this life they had built together was the true inheritance her father had left her. Not the money that had put her in danger, but the strength he had always seen in her. The strength that had carried her through her darkest days and led her, finally, to a man who valued that strength above all else. A man who had never tried to buy her, own her, or control her, but who had instead offered her the greatest gift of all, the freedom to be herself, to grow into her own power, and to be loved completely for exactly who she was. In a world and a time where women were too often seen as commodities to be traded, Hazel had found a love that recognized her humanity, her worth beyond price, and that, she knew with bone-deep certainty, was the rarest and most precious treasure of all.